Diablo 3's latest season has erupted into chaos. Path of Exile 2 players have uncovered some surprising loot truths, and NVIDIA claims their newest generation's weakest card matches the performance of their strongest card from last generation. Hey folks, this is Riker, and in this week's news roundup, we'll cover how Path of Exile players are still debating if item rarity is actually worth it. We'll talk about Diablo 3's latest season debacle, as well as NVIDIA's new graphics cards doubling down on AI in a big way. Meanwhile, the US Department of Defense just put Tencent on a list you definitely don't want to be on. We'll dive into all that and more. We also got a bit of news about the upcoming Diablo 4 season, which is right around the corner. And as a reminder, folks, if you need any guides or information for Diablo 4, I got all my video content categorized on my website, Riker.com, which brings us to a word from this video's sponsor. I built my website using Squarespace, and I was able to do everything myself, quickly and easily, and with zero education in the field. All thanks to how easy Squarespace is to work with. Squarespace even has a new AI tool called Design Intelligence, which combines 2 decades of industry-leading web design expertise with the latest AI tech to empower you to build a beautiful-looking, personalized website made exactly for your needs and your unique identity. Squarespace even has optimized SEO tools so that you can launch your website and start getting views as quickly as possible. Squarespace is flexible for any kind of website, with tons of design options to pick from. You can easily connect all your social accounts and also upload your video content and organize your video library. You can sell products or services, and with Squarespace Payment, you have an easy way to manage your payments in one place. You're just a few clicks away from being able to receive payments through your website, all while offering customers popular payment methods like Apple Pay, ClearPay, Klarna, and ACH Direct Debit. Basically, if you want to build a website, I recommend Squarespace. So head to squarespace.com/Riker or click the link in the description to start your free trial and use code Riker to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. That's squarespace.com/RHYKKER and use code Riker. Starting with Path of Exile 2 news. Once the devs came back from vacation, they announced that they'd be focusing this week on hotfixing various bugs in the game while also working on a bigger patch. They called it a restart patch, which just means that they need to take down and restart the server to deploy this patch, as opposed to a hotfix which gets deployed to the live servers. Some people thought that restart patch meant an economy reset or a character wipe or something. It is none of those things. They then deployed a patch this week with a lot of bug fixes, and among the patch notes was this gem. Note that, unrelated to Delirium Mist, further changes to strongboxes will be made in an upcoming patch to make them less terrible. Yeah, strongboxes take too long to spawn monsters, and when the monsters finally do spawn, they wander off, and it just takes so long to resolve a strongbox encounter. And the loot is often junk at the end of it. Even if you juice the strongbox, for anyone who isn't aware, you can actually use currency to craft on strongboxes just like you can on other items. It just doesn't really seem worth it to do. I did actually have one amazing strongbox experience. I think it must have been a cartographer strongbox, because after I completed it, a ton of maps dropped. Like, it's almost like a dozen maps. It was one of the most exciting drops I've had in the entire game so far. Now, tomorrow, Sunday, the devs plan to share more details about what to expect in patch 0.1.1. As for an update on my solo self-found experience, I've continued mapping. I've reached a point now where I'm easily sustaining maps. At the start, it was a struggle, partly because I was doing lower maps, partly because I didn't have any item rarity on my gear, which isn't going to give you more maps per se, but you're going to get more rare maps, and rare maps are going to have higher multipliers on them, so that you're just going to be getting more stuff in general in those maps, and ergo more maps as well. And I also apparently didn't have my atlas set up properly. Silly me, I set up my atlas to get more higher tier maps, when the optimum strategy to get maps in general is to not do that and go on the southeast path. But I digress. At this point, map sustain doesn't seem to be a problem anymore. I'm really looking forward to getting that map tab so that I can store them all properly now. And I'm running roughly 100 item rarity on my gear now. So not only am I getting more rare maps, I'm also getting more alchemist orbs to juice my maps. I do have to say that I don't love that it feels like you have to start your atlas tree with that southeast setup, like that there's only one viable path to begin with. But overall, I'm still enjoying progressing through the map tiers, earning my atlas points. I finally found boots with 30 move speed. I've been running no move speed for the longest time. So now, as a minion build, I am facing the issue of, oh, well, now I'm running ahead of my minions and they're despawning, so I'm trying to be aware of that and move forward only a little bit. Not too fast, keep them on my screen so they don't despawn and die. But man, it just feels so good to be moving faster now. I'm still finding it super rare to find or craft any upgrades of any kind. Again, those boots were like a big highlight for me. I craft on pretty much every item base that my build can use, and I've junked pretty much everything that I've found or crafted. And it's not because my gear is good, my resistances are nowhere close to max. There's tons of room for improvement on my gear overall. But it just feels like without trading, gearing is really slow in PoE 2. And my preference would be to play the game without trading. I prefer when a self-found isn't a challenge mode, but just another equally viable way to play the game. And it just feels like currently I'm going to have to eventually bite the bullet and start trading at some point. I still like the game overall enough to put up with that, but I would really, really rather a game in which I could just get all my own stuff by myself without trading with people and not feel like I'm severely disadvantaged and just not getting any upgrades. I understand no matter what game you play, trading is always going to be a huge advantage, but in some games where you have trading, you still feel like if you don't trade, I can still do everything, I can still feel really good about upgrades and stuff, as opposed to just completely starved. Now, speaking of mapping, there's this bug, or I guess you can say it's an exploit. I mean, it's the most innocuous exploit, but you can zoom your atlas out more than the game normally allows, which actually gives you a really nice view, a more zoomed out view. So to do it, basically open up your atlas, zoom in, and then while zooming out, hit escape. That's going to close the atlas. Then once you open the atlas again, you're going to be zoomed out further than the normal max. It would be great if they just make it a feature that we can zoom out this much. I would also love to see more quality of life added to the atlas in general, like filters where we can highlight, you know, like maybe just maps with bosses on them, or whatever granularity that we want to put in there, maps that have been juiced. You know, search features in general basically would be great. Maybe even allowing us to add bookmarks to certain maps so we can maybe plan a path, and then we look through our list of bookmarks and we just center the atlas on those bookmarks from our list of bookmarks, so that you don't spend 5 minutes trying to figure out where you want to go in the atlas. Then you realize, oh, I forgot to actually grab a map. You close the atlas, get your map, come back to the atlas, and you can't remember where you were, and you got to spend another 30 seconds going around trying to figure out where you were with the map that you want to put in. Now, as a follow-up to last week's video, when I said that there seems to be evidence that item rarity has a soft cap of around 100, soft cap isn't the right term to be using here. We're really talking about diminishing returns. So basically, stacking 100 item rarity on your gear seems to be more than enough to get you into the category of getting the best drops possible. And community member Slippery Jim 8 spent 16 days collecting data, farming 1,800 rare monsters and recording their drops and putting it all in a nice spreadsheet. He's got a whole video talking about it. Do check out his video. And he equipped different item rarities while doing all this to measure at item rarity 0, item rarity 100, item rarity 750, an absolutely ridiculous, disgusting amount of item rarity where he sacrificed everything. He barely had a playable build at that point just to stack all the item rarity. And his conclusion, after all of this effort, is that item rarity isn't broken, despite what a lot of people say. So, as an example that he gave, while running 100% item rarity, he got 10% more currency drops than with 0 item rarity. And with a whopping 750% item rarity, he got only 20% more currency drops than with 0. What he found to be a bigger multiplier was juicing the map itself, as opposed to having item rarity on your gear, which would then double the amount of extra drops that he was getting. So again, here evidence is pointing towards more than 100 item rarity being overkill for most people in most circumstances, and that item rarity isn't actually this catastrophically destructive thing that must be removed from the game at all costs. I still personally am not fond of item rarity on gear as an affix, but if Slippery Jim 8's conclusions are correct, then I don't think it's that big of a deal if things stay as they are. Overall, Path of Exile 2's Early Access is probably the best Early Access title I've ever played, in terms of feeling like a complete and polished game. 1 month in, and it's still one of the global top sellers on Steam, and it's hitting over 250,000 daily concurrent Steam players alone. What about you folks? Are you still having a good time in PoE 2? What are you most looking forward to coming in PoE 2 now? I personally cannot wait for a Huntress to play a Javazon again. Alright, on to some Diablo news. Last week's rumor turned out to be true. Diablo 1 is indeed coming to Game Pass, Ultimate, and PC Game Pass on January 14th. I think I'm overdue for another Diablo 1 playthrough. For Diablo 4, we're getting the next dev livestream update on January 16th at 11 AM PST, in which they'll talk about the new quest line coming with the season, other changes, and more. Of course, they're going to have the Q&A as usual. And as a reminder, we're expecting Season 7 to start on January 21st, and I've got videos covering the season theme and my initial impressions. Again, you can find that on my website. Also in D4 news, an old interview with Rod Ferguson has resurfaced for some reason. Videogamer.com posted an article titled, Diablo 4 lead claims players don't actually want classic Diablo back as modern games are too consumptive. Which really feels like it's painting Rod in a you think you do, but you don't kind of light. And the article quotes from a Windows Central interview from June 11th, a long time ago. And here is Ferguson's full quote. When you launch something, you're always doing it with a set of assumptions. We had the assumption that Diablo 4 was meant to be more Diablo 2-like. And so one of the assumptions was that people were going to be okay with the long grind for the uniques, or an uber unique in particular, because in Diablo 2, it can go years. You can go 3 years before you find the uber you're looking for. And in fact, there's something called the Holy Grail, which is getting one of everything, which literally takes years. And so we were like, okay, this is what people love about the progression of D2, that idea of that very long chase. And so we launched that way with D4, and we found out very quickly that if you don't give me my uber in my season, then I'm upset. And so we're like, okay, wow, okay. And now we actually have an uber unique currency to craft an uber. If you're not finding the uber, you can actually go make it yourself now, which is very different. It's just a kind of a recognition of how much players have changed in 20 years. So yeah, Rod isn't claiming that we don't want a classic Diablo game. He's saying that players complained about Diablo 2 style drop rates in D4, and so they changed the drop rates in direct response to player feedback. You know, back in the day, World of Warcraft devs said in response to requests for a vanilla WoW server, you think you do, but you don't, as in, you think you want to go back to the classic game experience, but actually you really don't want to go back to that. We know better than you. And they were ultimately proven wrong. They gave in, they made WoW Classic, and it was a success. And Blizzard literally already made Diablo 2 Resurrected. They did this already. If they thought people didn't want a classic Diablo game, they wouldn't have made a product for people who want a classic Diablo game. But onto Diablo 3 news. Yikes. Okay. We haven't really spoken about Diablo 3 in a while. I mean, we don't talk about it much since D4 came out. And I really wish I had some good news to report here. Diablo 3 Season 33 had begun in October 25th. And its end date was therefore speculated to be around January 26th. Right? 3 months. This is based on past seasons. However, it ended abruptly and without warning on January 5th in Europe and Asia, and it would only be a matter of time before presumably it would also end in America. Community director Adam Fletcher posted on social media, quote, "Heard and got some pings while I've been out, and I have production checking on this early end. This shouldn't have ended today, so something is funky. We'll provide an update once I hear back." He later added, quote, "So it looks like some miscommunication internally here on some teams, but we are looking to stop it from ending on US realms and are looking to getting it back up for EU and Asia. We will provide an update on those once they have started back up." And after this, the season on the America server also ended. Now, at some point after the season ended worldwide on all servers, Blizzard did manage to turn the season back on again, but that caused a whole other headache by itself. Once the season was back on, some players couldn't create new seasonal characters or play their old characters. And for those who could play, they had their seasonal characters returned to seasonal status, yes. But you know how at the end of a season, everything gets yeeted onto your non-season server, all your Paragon gets transferred, your stash and all that? Well, now that their seasonal character was back in the season, their Paragon didn't transfer back. So now they're a seasonal character with 0 Paragon. And everything in their stash didn't come back over either. So they're a seasonal character with no Paragon and no items in their stash. Some players even had negative Paragon levels and negative Paragon points. They were basically in a Paragon deficit and had to start earning back negative Paragon points just to reach 0 and then start gaining Paragon again. Then there was weird exploity stuff going on, where like players who had managed to grab gear from non-season and equip it onto their character, well, when their character got brought back into season, now they were holding on to legacy gear in the season. And there was also some like weird stuff where for some players, their non-season Paragon points were being treated as being applied to their seasonal character. So you had these like new characters with 80,000 main stat. Some players started to resort to account rollbacks, which actually did work. But a lot of people didn't want to do this because you are only ever allowed in the entirety of your Blizzard account to get 3 account rollbacks. And some people didn't want to burn their rollback on this. Now, as of this recording, this issue has yet to be resolved. The only official update we got was that Season 34 will begin on January 24th, and Season 33 will come to an end on January 19th. Season 34's theme will be Light's Calling, which sees a return of the Angelic Crucibles, which was another one of the best Diablo 3 seasons. Then in some brief last Epoch news, players got a mysterious 8 gig update on Steam this week with no patch notes. Once people started asking questions, the devs clarified that this was the Unity 2021 engine upgrade, which should not affect anything player-facing, and they don't expect players to notice anything different at all. The devs have also been teasing what to expect in the coming months. Big things, it seems. And among other things, we're getting better controller support as something on the menu, and they've also hugely hinted at the ability to send shards straight to storage, rather than first into your inventory, and then you gotta click a button to eat them into storage. Then in some NVIDIA news, we got the reveal of the GeForce RTX Blackwell series this week, which are all about AI, using new DLSS 4 frame generation to crank out even more performance. With frame generation, they claim that the 5070, the weakest of the new cards, which is available for $550, is equal in power to a 4090, the strongest card of last generation, and that the 5090, the strongest card of this generation, and will be available for $2,000, can double the output of a 4090 with DLSS. Now, of course, this is all with frame generation, with the AI assistance. If you take that aside and you're just looking at straight raster, at straight rendering, these cards seem to only show maybe a 20% increase in power on average to their previous gen counterparts. NVIDIA is really leaning on AI as the future of graphics rendering, with DLSS 4, which is only available on the new Blackwell cards, generating 3 frames per 1 rendered frame. As a point of comparison, DLSS 3.5, which is what the current gen or the past gen of cards uses, for every 1 rendered frame, it generates 1 AI frame. So we're tripling now the number of AI frames with the Blackwell cards. It's also worth noting, however, that not all games actually support frame generation. Now, the 5090 at $2,000 is $400 more expensive than the 4090 was. In that previous gen, though, a lot of people actually opted to buy the 4090 rather than the 4080. 4080 being what the mid-tier card was, or the expected high-end, the non-enthusiast card. So I imagine this is NVIDIA performing a market correction, since historically the 90 class of cards has always been really just for like well-off enthusiasts who would spend a bunch of money for not much more performance just to be able to say that they have the absolute best card. I don't see the average gamer forking over $2,000 for a 5090. Not when the 5080 is half the price at $1,000, which itself is $200 cheaper than the 4080 was at launch. The 4070 was $600, with the 4070 Ti coming in at $800. So the 5070 at $550 and $750 for the 5070 Ti really is a good price point. I mean, to clarify, video card prices kind of went insane over the past couple of generations, so I can't say any of this is cheap. Obviously, I'd like it if these all were less expensive, but it's nice that the numbers are not still going even higher for the cards that people are expected to buy. Because I don't think we're ever going back to the days of getting a 1080 Ti for $600. Not now that the market has shown its hand. We've shown we're willing to pay a lot more for video cards, so why would they ever decrease prices? The 5090 and the 5080 release this month, while the 5070 and the 5070 Ti will launch in February. In other news, Tencent, the Chinese mega corporation that partially or fully owns a ton of game dev studios and a bunch of other stuff as well, has been designated as a Chinese military company by the US Department of Defense. Tencent is one of the highest grossing multimedia companies in the world based on revenue, and it is the world's largest video game company based on equity investments. They own Riot. They own Grinding Gear Games. They're large investors in From Software, Larian, Ubisoft, Epic, and more. Why did the DoD classify Tencent this way? Well, it claims military-civil fusion, a strategy it claims the Chinese government uses to combine civilian research and commercial success to advance its military. Now, we know that Tencent does work closely with the Chinese government, or has in the past. They've worked together to make propaganda games, and in 2020, a former CIA official claimed that the CIA concluded that Tencent received seed money from the Ministry of State Security, basically the Chinese CIA. Tencent, however, has denied this allegation and any allegations of this sort. Now, being designated a Chinese military company by the Pentagon doesn't actually do anything. Not by itself. There are no legal consequences to this. They're not going to get sanctions just because of this classification. But it's a bad look, and it may make business partners and potential business partners think twice. Now, Tencent has told Bloomberg that this designation is clearly a mistake, and they'll be pushing to remove their name from the Department of Defense's list. And we've seen things like this happen before. Chinese phone manufacturer Xiaomi was added to the same list in 2021, and within months they were then removed from the list. In a statement to The Verge, Tencent said that this designation has no impact on their business. Now, some argue that this classification from the US government was politically motivated to harm Chinese business, and I don't want to get into the politics of it. And that's going to wrap up this week's video, but do be sure to check out last week's video, in which we discuss why a lot of Path of Exile 2 players may soon be facing the banhammer. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters for making these videos possible. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and subscribe to join Riker's Raiders for more gaming content.